Welcome to the home stretch of the book of Numbers as we continue in teaching through the Bible. So we're on these last chapters, chapter 32 through 36, and so we're going to dive right into it and get through these chapters today, be done with this book, and move on to the book of Deuteronomy. So today we start with chapter 33, actually. Israel's journey through the wilderness from all the way from Egypt. It starts in chapter 33. It starts talking about all these different places they went, starting from back in Egypt. Verse 3, they set out from Ramses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month, on the day after the Passover, because that's on the 14th day, if you remember. The people of Israel went out triumphantly in the sight of all the Egyptians. And so they're moving out. Then it goes all the way through their journeys. It doesn't necessarily hit every place they went. Actually, there's indication that there's places that they did go that aren't mentioned here, that we see other places in the Bible. So it's not telling you every single place that they went, but it's hitting on some different points, giving a map of kind of where they were. And now we don't know where all these places were historically, so we can't actually remap that out completely accurately. But it gives us indication of where they went from place to place to place until they got to the Promised Land, just right up the edge of the Promised Land on the plains of Moab, which is where they're at this point. Now, why would it say this? Why is it just kind of giving you this itinerary of where they went when we could see this from what we've read already? Some people actually found it useful to compare. They take what they've seen already, and then they take this itinerary and they put them together and can kind of learn some stuff from that. But I think really what's going on here, as far as the purpose of it being in the Bible, is this is reminding God's people who are there. This is, remember, the second generation is preparing. Now, the first generation, they prepared, and then what happened? It didn't end well, right? They rebelled. The second generation is being reminded they weren't all there that whole time through all the journeys. But they've been told about it, right? And they're being reminded, remember how God has been faithful up to this point. Remember what he's done. Like what I just read in verse 3, it continues in verse 4. It says they went out triumphantly in the sight of the Egyptians. Verse 4, while the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn, whom Yahweh had struck down among them. On their gods also, Yahweh executed judgments. So given some high points, also reminding them of places that they, the people, have rebelled, have failed, and God's still bringing them through all this. As you continue reading through 33, there's just all these places that will remind them either of ways they've been unfaithful, but in spite of that, where God has been faithful. And that's important to look back. For us, it's important to look back at things in our lives, at parts of our lives that remind us of God's faithfulness, how he's been faithful in the past, to encourage us that he's going to be faithful in the future. And so I think that's kind of what's going on here. And circled around that in chapters 32 and 34, we're seeing something about the land. That's a big part of this. They're about to go enter the land. And actually, not all of them, it appears, want that land. In fact, we have this map here. You've got Sea of Galilee, you've got the Jordan River, and the Dead Sea. Now, on one side, you have the Promised Land. Yay, good, Promised Land. That's what God promised them. On the other side, you don't have the Promised Land. The other side, that's not the Promised Land. In fact, if you look at chapter 34 that says the boundaries of the Promised Land, it can be kind of hard to know where are all these places, what are all these names. But one thing that's really clear is the eastern boundary in this area. It goes way up further, but part of the eastern boundary is the Jordan River. So that's the eastmost part. So this side over here, the east side of the Jordan River, that's not part of the Promised Land. And if you want more of an idea of what the Promised Land was supposed to look like, the boundaries, all that kind of stuff, you can just look at maps. There's some really good ones. I have the ESV Bible Atlas that's got a lot of good stuff in there, a lot of great maps done by a guy who's an archaeologist, and really, really good information there. But you know from chapter 34 that the east side was not part of the promised land. But guess what? Even though that's the case, and they've known this is not a secret. It's always been, we're going to cross over the Jordan River. We're going to take that land that's on the west side of the Jordan River. But in chapter 32, some of the tribes, they say, actually, I just want this land. We're already here. We're good. Now, it's not, I guess you could say it's not really totally clear if this is a good or bad thing. But there's a couple reasons why I lean towards this not being a good thing. Now, Moses does start out very much against it. But they say, hey, no, we're not trying to abandon everybody else. We'll go over and we'll fight with you guys and help you guys take over that land. But we're good with this land. So Moses ended up saying that's okay. And maybe this is supposed to be a way that God is approving it through Moses. But a lot of times Moses is said to go to God and talk to him about things. And here we don't see anything about consulting Yahweh about this. So that's interesting. Not every time does it say that, but a lot of times it does. So that's something to notice. But also, what has been the habit of the Israelites? When they were in the wilderness, God says, go into the promised land. And they're like, no, we want to go back to Egypt. Right? And here, are they doing the same thing? Go into the promised land. No, we're good where we are. This is a good land. To them it is, right? Their eyes see, we think this is good, actually. We'll take this instead of what God offered. I think that's probably what's going on here. That they see this is good enough. They're going to settle for that and settle there instead of taking part in the promised land that God has promised them. And so, not a great look for them. Not a great start here. But that seems to be, I think, what's going on there. That they are, God kind of, he allows it maybe, but this is not a good request, I don't think. So you've got, that's chapter 32, where there's actually it's two tribes are saying, hey, this is what we want. And then when that's approved, there's another half tribe, half of Manasseh, is like, yeah, and we'll join them in that too. So that's what we got in those chapters. Looking at the land, looking at the boundaries. If you read chapter 34 and you may say, what is going on with these boundaries? But just already we've seen, well, there's one way that we have learned from chapter 34, because we see that the boundary for the east boundary is that river. So what they just asked for in 32 is definitely not part of that land. And then we move on to the final two chapters. We have 35 and 36. 35 talks about cities of refuge. So here we see that God, if this was bad, if this was not a good request, God is being merciful to them, because these cities of refuge, he says 3 on each side of the river. So I marked roughly where they are, right? 3 on the west side, which is Canaan, the promised land, but 3 on the east side. So they actually, God's giving them cities of refuge even over there. And what are these cities of refuge? Well, so if someone murders, then that's evil. There's punishment for that. It's death. Simple as that. Even if you're not necessarily what we would call murder, but like you're kind of culpable for it. You should have known better, and you do something that causes someone else's death, then that's still kind of put in that murder category. But what if it was just this complete accident? It's not your fault. And they give some examples there, and where you weren't trying to do that. There's no way for you to have known that was going to happen, and you accidentally kill someone. Well, there's one designated person, the avenger of blood is what he's called, who is allowed to avenge that person. It's not a free-for-all. Not anyone can do this. One designated person is allowed to go and kill the person who killed maybe it was their brother or their cousin or whatever the relation is. One designated person is allowed to do that. That's the law. But if this was something that was not really the fault of the person who accidentally killed this other person, then that individual can run to one of these cities of refuge. And inside that city of refuge, they're safe. Now, there's going to be a case on this. They have to be determined that they really weren't at fault for this. that it was really an accident that they couldn't have foreseen, that they're not guilty of anything in that sense. And if that is the case, then they're safe. If it's not, then they're not. Then a city of refuge does not protect them. But if that is the case, that they are determined to be innocent in that manner, they can stay in that city of refuge, and the avenger of blood cannot get them. If they leave the city of refuge, all bets are off. So they're stuck in there, but their life is safe in there. And then there's a way out. When the high priest dies, they're free. They can leave. The avenger of blood has no claim over them anymore. Why on earth is that the case? That seemed kind of out of left field. Oh, but if the high priest dies, then you're good to go. And when I used to teach Bible at school, one of the middle school kids who maybe kind of saying this because middle school boys like to, kind of make their jokes, and maybe he was saying this kind of partially to be silly, but also I think genuinely had this question that, like, what if he gets the high priest killed? This guy is stuck in the city of refuge, and then what if he goes and kills the high priest? Then he's free to go, right? And my answer to that is, yeah, because that's happened before, actually. Because there was a high priest, a great high priest, who was murdered in order for us to be set free. You see, this points us forward to what's going to happen with Jesus. This is the gospel. That Jesus, the great high priest, when he died, just like in here, if the high priest dies, the person in the city of refuge goes free. When Jesus died, that meant we could go free. That's what this is showing us here. That's an amazing, to me, I think it's so cool to be able to see these connections from the Old Testament to the New, pointing forward to Jesus. And lastly, after the city of refuge, we get this one last thing before we end Numbers, talking about the daughters of Zelophehad again. And in this case, it's kind of similar, but a little different from last time. Because this time it's not the daughters coming forward. It is the heads of the fathers' houses of the clan of the people of Gilead, the son of Machir, son of Manasseh, from the clans of the people of Joseph. So now they have been, that half-tribe of Manasseh has been given land over here, right? At this point, they've been given land, and so now they can start settling it, and some of the leaders come up and say, whoa, hold on a second, though. Now you're going to give the daughters of Zelophehad land. Cool, no problem. But what if then they marry someone from Judah? Judah over here is going to be right over here. It's another tribe. Or from Naphtali, over here, right? Then that land goes to whoever they married, right? So now someone from Judah has land over in this part of Manasseh. And that tribe is losing some of their inherited land. And so Moses takes this to God, who says, yeah, that's true. No, so these women can have that land. They just then have to marry someone in their tribe specifically, so the land stays in the tribe. No one loses land. That tribe is not going to have land taken away from them. The land is permanent. It stays with them. This is a promise. This is part of the promise that God has this land for his people. And so that is, again, we see God making this ruling where people are saying, okay, well, we know what the general rule is, but what about the situation? And God gives clarification on that. That's really great. And everyone agrees to this. And the daughters, they weren't married at this point earlier, but now when they do marry, they marry within their own tribe. And then that kind of gets right to the end of Numbers right there, talking about this issue of the land. Because the land is important, the land is part of the promise, so it is important to see here what's going on. And we wrap up Numbers 36 with verse 13. These are the commands and the rules that Yahweh commanded through Moses to the people of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. Kind of wrapping up Numbers here. Remember, this was all about, with this outline, it's generation, first generation. They're preparing, but then they fail. We got the second generation preparing. Preparing for what? The theme is preparing for the promised place. They're getting ready to enter. They're getting ready to go. We've already seen all sorts of problems, but God overcomes it because God is merciful. God has a plan. And despite all that they've done to rebel, they're still about to enter. And Moses is still the leader, but he's not going to be able to make it. He's the last one that's going to die before they get to cross over. And we're going to hear his last words to his people in Deuteronomy before he has to also die, before they can enter into that promised land. And so we'll begin that in Deuteronomy next time. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.